Well, I tell you what, welcome to Healthy Alternatives Podcast on janethull.com. And today, our very special guest is Dr. Woodrow Monte, Woody. Woody was a professor emeritus at Arizona State University. And he was in the School of Nutrition and Health, Biochemistry, Biomolecular Biology, and Biotechnology. And Woody's got a background that's just amazing. But I'll tell you how I met Woody. I met Woody through my aspartame work. I'm not a research scientist when it comes to aspartame like Woody is, but I was researching what caused me to have aspartame poisoning, what it was all about, and Woody Monte came over everything Woody Monte, his research and his work. And so I got to know Woody. Gosh, Woody, it's been about 30 years, I think, since.
Oh, yeah.
It's about 30 years. So when the WHO made their announcement that they were going to label next month, they're going to label aspartame a carcinogen, I knew that it was time to bring the aspartame issue back front and center. And so I immediately contacted Woody, and we're working together now to get this information resurrected. I would say that's probably the best word to use, right? It's been hidden.
Okay. That's the appropriate word. The sad thing is that, even though the notion of aspartame and having aspartame as a dangerous compound or any kind of food-related compound is fading and has faded over all these years. It's been going on for a really long time, because it was turned down so many times by the Food and Drug Administration. And that was a long time ago. And it was always turned down because of cancer. They were worried about cancer, particularly a very rare kind of brain cancer, which has increased dramatically over the years all by itself. But there's other cancers involved as well. But anyway, it was very, very high news item type of thing, for quite a long time. And now it's sort of fading. But I mean, the sad thing is right now it's being used more than ever in its history. I mean, and the reason for this is it's so amazingly inexpensive that it's actually less expensive to use aspartame as a sweetener than sugar. So every pound of aspartame is equivalent to 100 or 200 pounds, depending on the formulation of sugar, and it only costs a few dollars. And so that's the tragedy of it all. So over the years, even though there's been consistently news reports and, more importantly, scientific discoveries that have shown that people who consume aspartame have more higher level of strokes, have a higher level of certain kinds of heart disease, has a higher level of, consistently we've seen this appearing in the literature. And now cancer is finally being identified as increasing dramatically, 26% higher breast cancer rates, for instance. And so, but the tragedy is the use levels have not diminished because the government refuses to respond to the science, as they always have in this particular case. It's a politically protected entity because so many people in the Food and Drug Administration, many of them are still there, are indebted to its existence. So this is tragic. This is really tragic and getting worse.
Woody, what got you into researching the safety of aspartame, back in the 1960s, 1970s?
That's right. Well, I was involved with food safety issues before that. I helped the Center for the Science Michael Jacobson from the Center of the Science and Public Interest. I helped him with getting sulfiting agents labeled as dangerous and being kept off the generally regarded as safe list. That was the first time I actually responded as a food scientist against the food industry, because the food industry was pretty happy to have sulfiting agents in anything without having to put it on the label. They would have liked that. And once a food additive gets on the generally regarded as safe list, it can, under certain circumstances, be put into a product without being labeled. And they were interested in that. But the problem was that about, anyway, 10% of the population of asthmatics were extremely sensitive to sulfiting agents, and it had been shown to be deadly for a number of people. And so we fought like hell to get that, to keep the Food and Drug Administration from listing it on the generally regarded as safe list. We won 60 Minutes and several times, Michael and I and some other scientists, just to try to stop it from happening. And, you know, I'll admit this, usually food scientists don't sidestep the food industry, because that's where you get your money for doing your research.
Right.
And so I was sort of chastised for that. But I mean, you know, I had just started teaching at Arizona State University, and I just decided that, you know, that particular issue was important to me, and I could handle the resistance I was getting from the rest of the industry, and so I just let it roll off my back. So it made me quite, yeah, sort of courageous that way. And so we won that issue. You know, the sulfites were not put on generally regarded as safe list. Still, they're used quite a bit in the industry, but that's, at least they're on the labels. And so at any rate, I get a phone call from a California lawyer. And the details of this, if anybody's really interested, are on the internet. And also in my book. I've got a book called While Science Sleeps, which is available through Amazon. But at any rate, if you need the details, names, and that kind of thing, that's a good place to go. It's free on my site, which is whilesciencesleeps.com. Any rate, so this lawyer asked me if I would be interested in researching a food additive, looking at the toxicity of it. And he said he had a client, which the client was the national soft drink beverage industry, which was odd, who was interested in supporting that research. He said the first thing I would do they'd send me to Washington, D.C. during this very critical time where, for the third time, aspartame was trying to get approved by the Food and Drug Administration. This would have been the last attempt that would be allowed, because it had been turned down already twice by expert panels. And at this point, there was a rare opportunity for anybody who had an interest to go to Washington, D.C. and go to the archives of the Food and Drug Administration. And there in a room would be all this research, scientific studies that were paid for by the company, which at that time was called the G.D. Searle Company. They're still around. They make Metamucil, I think, is one of the things they sell. But anyway, that company was, again, for the third time, applying to get this sweetener approved against, tremendous negativity. But at any rate, this was a time when you could go in and they had to give you access to all of this research, which was normally held as secret to the company. I mean, that doesn't seem like that would be fair, but that's the way it is. So in order for me to see that research and review it, I had to go to Washington, D.C. So they were willing to pay my way, and they would give me a good salary for doing that. I mean, I would and then I'd write a report, the results of that, and submit it to them, and then they would. But they wanted me to write the report in the form of an objection to the food additives. So right away, I knew that for some reason they decided that I was a food scientist that was willing to object to a food additive. So I'm thinking that this is a little strange, because if they want me to do an impartial study, what is that all about? So I just said, well, let me think about it. So I thought about it, and I got back to him in a week and said, yeah, because it was a summer thing, and this is I think my second year at Arizona State University.
What year was this, Woody?
Oh,
Think back.
1803. I'm not good at dates, Janet, but I think it was about 81. It was just right before aspartame was approved, so you can tell you, yeah. And so anyway, so I got back to him and said, look, I can't guarantee you that I'm going to be negative about this or positive about it. I haven't even seen the studies, and I mean, I'm looking at the last two, and I did get a chance to review the last two denials of the application. And I said that it seems to indicate that there's some real cancer problem here. So I'll just do it, and you pay to do it, and I'm not going to guarantee anything. I'll just get you an honest report, best I can do. And so that is it, because I had, aside from the sulfiting agents, my research was in other areas really, and so anyway. So that's what happened. So within about a month, I went to Washington, D.C. and set up in very close proximity to the library, and just started daily basis going in there. And I'd go, basically, well, anyway, the story is fun, but I don't want to pick up all
this is no. You take your time. This is history, Woody. This is wonderful to know. This is wonderful to know.
Oh,
keep going.
Then so before I left, I started looking at the chemistry of aspartame, and it's how it breaks down and how it's metabolized. And I tried to look at it the way I would look at it as an additive for safety purposes. And the one thing that bothered me that didn't seem to be in the literature was that every molecule of aspartame turns into methyl alcohol. And and methyl alcohol is an amazing natural chemical. And I found out more and more about it, of course, as this went on. But that was what I was going to hit as being something of interest to me, because I wanted to learn something from the process myself. So I started reading up on methyl alcohol. So when I got to the Food and Drug Administration, I had written to a guy who was sort of the head toxicologist there to get permission to go in and whatever. And he was very negative about me doing this. He was obviously on the other side of this issue. And just to give people, some idea of what was actually going on. By that time, Ronald Reagan had been elected, and Ronald Reagan picked as one of his people to go in ahead of him even getting into office, and sort of starting to turn things around so that the office would be ready for him to approach that. So one of the guys he picked was Donald Rumsfeld, who was, Secretary of Defense in previous administrations. He was a pretty powerful guy, and he coincidentally happened to be the president of just G.G. Searle and Company. And so, and as soon as he got to Washington, he fired the head of the Food and Drug Administration, which was which had been indicating the fact that they were going to turn this thing down. He got rid of him, and then put in this guy named Hull Hayes, who
Alfred
turned out.
Hull Hayes? Was it Alfred Hull Hayes?
I think Alfred. Oh, yeah, I don't know his first name, but I think that was it. Yeah. Anyway, you can find him on the internet. He's basically a criminal. He was eventually thrown out because he stole money. But anyway, so that was what I'm up against. So this toxicologist was a friend of that crowd. So I got, I'd made, I was very careful and trying to be nice to everybody. And because I knew I was going to need help, when I got there, because, I was confronted with, a lot of publications that would just, stacked in a room that had about 25 tables that were like library tables. And there
Uh-huh.
were these stacks and stacks and stacks of studies and data and all that stuff. And so it would have been good to have a friendly relationship with this toxicologist, because he should have showed me through so it wouldn't make life miserable for me. But I got there, I got to the main office. I had a sheet of paper that was my ticket to get in. And basically, they kept me just cooling my heels for 7.5 hours outside. I got there a little bit early in the morning. They were supposed to let me in right away, but the toxicologist was just too busy. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe, giving Donna Rumsfeld a massage or something. So at any rate,
So it was a swamp back then.
yeah. So at any rate, I'm cooling my heels. I had work to do. I'm a professor, so I had things to do. I brought things to do just in case something like that happened. Finally, he allows me to go into his office he had to have him sign my ticket so I could get in. And so he said, "So what are you really concerned about, Professor?" And I said, "Well, my biggest concern is methyl alcohol." And he said, quote, "Methyl alcohol is a food." And I'm going, "Really? Oh, that's interesting. Since you're the head toxicologist, that's amazing for you to say that, since I can't find anywhere where it's a food. It's not only is it a dreadful poison, but it's a poison specific to human beings, and a poison to which all animals that we know of, are not sensitive to in any way." And I said, that's very disheartening to me. And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm going to let you in. You'll get your ticket, blah, 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 blah." And so that was very discourteous of him. He was just a real, but that's what they wanted to do, I'm sure. So at any rate, so I got in. I only had about 20 minutes in there that first day. And so anyway, so the story is, I didn't have to go through that procedure the next day or the next day or I just was allowed. I got my little ticket. I was allowed to go in. And, I started going through these piles, which, it was pretty disheartening, because it was just piles and piles and piles. And there was no order to it all, no date order or anything. They went into their vault and they got and they just laid it on the table. And I was about alone. There were every once in a while, a reporter or somebody would come in there. I met James Turner, who was a lawyer, who was working with other scientists to try to keep aspartame off the market. And so I got to meet him. That was good. We had lunch a couple of times. And anyway, but the neat thing that happened, and this was really really interesting. And I'd be sitting at my little desk reading through these things. I had a little, I couldn't copy anything, but I had a camera with me, and I was, taking pictures of stuff and then writing notes, the way a scholar would do in those days. And so people would wait till the room were empty, and then people would just walk in who actually worked for the Food and Drug Administration. Employees never got their names. They either had their little tags that they all wore were off or whatever. But "You're Dr. Monte." I said, "Yeah." And so, "Yeah, good." And then we just disappear, And so, I go up and go to get another article. I come back to my little desk, and there'd be this manuscript from one of the piles opened up to a page and just sitting there right next to where I was sitting. And this one time, I just got back in time to see the guy laying this thing down. And I said, is this yours? And the fellow turned around, he said, no, Dr. Monte, that's for you.
Oh
And
boy.
that happened. Oh, that happened just about every day, at least once. And everything that they were showing me was devastating. Studies that were done with monkeys, feeding monkey parents aspartame, and then all the monkeys would get the offspring would die for one reason or another. And then just article after article. So I really, without them, it would. I mean, I couldn't have done it in the summer. It would have been impossible. So that was good. So, and I figured, and these people were interested in me seeing this, and they were just people who happened to work there. So I'm going, they know what's going on. So this
They
is
knew it was
interesting.
in there. Yeah, they knew it was in there.
And they were, I wish I knew their names because I would have put them in the book and said, this is a good person. But hopefully they're still alive. But anyway, so this lasted a long time. And then I had to go back and start writing this thing up. But I felt very comfortable in writing it up because I had so much information and so many of their studies really were dreadful. The results were dreadful. Now, they didn't have to publish the studies. They just had to have, them there. So they would just, the people who were doing the studies were obviously good scientists, and they're not going to lie.
Mhm.
And so the end results, they're the end results, but nobody could see it because if they didn't get it published, then of course, only the FDA would see it. And if you got people who on your side working for the FDA, then you get anything accepted, So there you go. So that was interesting. So I wrote this thing up. It took me forever, not forever, but it was hard work, and so I, in the meantime, this lawyer was paying for my expenses. They paid my hotel rooms. They paid my travel expenses. They paid for food and stuff like that. So that was good. And I wasn't going to get my salary until it was all over with, but that was fine. It was really, I was learning a lot and I was excited about it because it was just so interesting. And so I get back to Arizona and just started writing and we just putting things together. So I put it together. I think it was 100 and some odd pages, and it was just devastating. It was terrible. And so I was so proud of that, only because it was good work. And I thought, well, this is great. So I sent this document to the lawyer in California. And, it was about 3 weeks before the deadline for anybody who was interested in objecting to aspartame being approved. And then I added the stuff about the methanol that I discovered, the fact that it was just, extremely small amounts of it are deadly in humans, and it's so different from one human to the other. And the important thing, which is it turns into formaldehyde immediately. And so formaldehyde is a dreadful chemical, and it happens, it's even worse than consuming formaldehyde, because when your body makes contact with formaldehyde directly, it's so reactive, it attaches to all the protein on your nasal passages and stuff. It never can get into your brain by itself. It can't get into your heart. It can't get into anywhere because it can barely, it's just so reactive. And it attaches to protein in your body's protein. And that combination of your body's protein and the formaldehyde, it turns out that combination, there are sites on the large white blood cells, the macrophages, called, protein modified, formaldehyde modified albumin or formaldehyde modified protein sites that, 100 million years ago, these macrophages had built into them. So macrophage would travel, from your big toe all the way to your heart if they even hear about or they're somehow chemically are notified that this combination has been found in the body. So it's just the beginning of autoimmunity. It just whenever that happens. And so if this is happening anyway, all that important stuff was in this document. And so I'm so proud of it, and I can't wait till they file it. So the National Soft Drink Beverage Association was supposed to file this thing because I had written it for them, and they would just put a front page on it and say, well, here's our objection. So it's getting closer and closer to the deadline, and I kept on looking because when you work for lawyers and stuff, they just sort of they're not in contact with you. You just I've been an expert witness for years on food safety issues, and I know what it's like. You're not privy to anything.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to find out about something, you got to put yourself in there. And so anyway, I'm looking at the Federal Register for this thing to appear because that's what happens. The day it would be filed, right, it would appear in the Federal Register. We're getting close to the deadline. It was a week to the deadline, and I had given it to him a month before. So I said, well, I'm curious. So I called him up, and he said, "Oh, hi, Woody. How are you doing?" I said, "Fine." Blah blah. Small talk. He said, "I know you're waiting for your check, and we're just getting ready to issue it." And I said, "I'm not so worried about the check as I am about the file being filed with the Food and Drug Administration. When are you going to file this objection?" And he said, "Oh, well, hemming and hawing." And I'm going, "No, don't hem and haw me. I mean, this is a serious thing. I mean, I found some stuff that is deadly. This is horrifying. This stuff cannot be approved." And, and this wasn't even the issue that these other scientists were worried about cancer, the brain cancer, the stuff like this, and they were looking at it from a different direction. And I was looking at it from just this one aspect, but it was a very important aspect. And so he didn't have to do this, but he told me the story. And the story was that, in fact, he would get in trouble, I'm sure, with everybody in the universe. But he felt bad for me because he knew I put so much of my heart and soul into it. And he just said, "Well, they hired you because they figured you were going to be negative about it anyway. And they just needed to have this report as basically a way of changing G.D. Searle and company's way of releasing the additive." I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Well, G.D. Searle was going to give an exclusive to Coca-Cola for their diet soda. And that's for the first 2 years, and then let other companies, and the national soft drink beverage industry is not, Coca-Cola is just a member, but there's the other members make up, of course, the majority. So they actually used now Searle is going to just release to everybody on a fair basis." So he said they really would like to see it. They would like to use the stuff, so they're not going to get in the way. And so,
wow,
I couldn't say anything on the phone and so I said, "Look, I had to think about this." He said, "Well, it's all over now. I mean, there's nothing we can do." I thought, so I hung up on him, and I'm thinking, nothing we can do. So I called my lawyer, who would just a friend I had known because I'd worked for his company on a food safety issue for what company was it for? Big company. At any rate, so he was real happy with it. So we got to be friends, and I said, I have to have lunch with you and tell you what's going on." So we went out. We went out for lunch. Their building in downtown Phoenix. They had a huge office, and he was again a young lawyer. He'd only been, but he was smart as hell. And I told him this story, and he said, "Have they paid you?" And I said, "No, not yet. I mean, they reimbursed me for my expenses, which they had to do, and but I haven't got my pay." And he said, "Well, It's up to you. If you want to file that yourself, you can just go file it yourself. I'll help you do the paperwork. I said, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. And so the next day I called the attorney and said, good news, bad news. Good news is, yeah, I understand exactly what was going on there. Bad news is I'm going to file it. You can't do that. He said, they'll sue you. I said, you know what? I've got a good group of lawyers that have volunteered to help me out with, and the whole firm actually volunteered to help me. They knew there was it could be a problem. I said, they can sue me, but I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to be in their shoes. I was blustering. And so that's what I did. So I filed it, and
Wow.
it got republished. They accepted, or they had to accept it. They can't not accept it, and it was
Right.
published in the Code of Federal Regulations, and the battle started there. I mean, yeah. So that was it. So that's how that all began. So it wasn't something I intended to do with my life, but it was something that, it just fell into my hands, and I just said, oh, it's fine. So that was it. So and then it went on from there, then 60 Minutes didn't do anything, I don't think, but I think Dan Rather did a special show on it, and I was on that show, and, one thing led to the other. Then there's all sorts of intrigue going on, and they tried to keep me from getting tenure, but I had been a good little scholar, and so the university just took my side on it, which was good. And so, yeah, so anyway, but it wasn't a pleasant experience to go through, because but anyway, it's a long story from then on. So, and then, you know lots of things happened, because people knew that I was on the other side of this issue. And the most exciting, not exciting, it was really devastating, but I'm in my office, and I get a call from my department chair, who was, the people at ASU were always very supportive of me, which was really good. And everybody was covering for me. I mean, even when we had trouble with their people sort of hanging around my laboratory and eavesdropping and stuff like that. I mean, the campus police got on it right away. There was a weird thing happened when my house burned down with me in it, and the fire department, and everybody has been on my side, as far as I can say, and it was really been very good. But so anyway, so my department chair calls up and said, Woody, there's a really upset woman down here. She wants to come up to see you, but I don't know. She seems like she's out of sorts. So I don't know. What do you want us to do? And I said, sure, just send her up. I mean, I'll see her. And so she is real spunky lady, real, but very, very emotionally upset. And so she's, comes in, and she keeps herself together for the whole time, except toward the end. And she had an empty 2-liter bottle of Diet Coke in her hands. And this is sort of a little bit further along, because this is after they actually approved aspartame to put it into liquid beverages. That was a little later. But anyway, so
it's a few years after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she hands me this, thin envelope, and she said, did you look at this? And so I opened it up, and there's this picture of this terribly deformed baby. And then she had named the baby Joy. And so she said, this is Joy. This is my, and I said, oh, Jesus Christ. So I'm looking at this. Well, sorry, it's amazing. It's so, and so basically the child was born without a brain, or just maybe there was enough brain to maybe medulla to keep its heart beating for a while. So technically it was born and lived for hours. That was all. It lived
Mm-hmm.
for. And it was a classic case of neural tube birth defect. It was
Mm-hmm.
just classic neural tube birth defects. And so I said, wow. And so she said, you know what caused this? I said, no. She said, it's was in this bottle right here, this bottle. I drank 2 of these a day, from
Oh,
before I was pregnant. And she said, I know it's what's in here. And so, I mean, I was sort of shook up, but we sat down and chatted and stuff. And I promised her that I would look into it and see, because there was nothing at all, nothing at all. And this is the amazing part of this story. There was a study done feeding aspartame, actual aspartame, to animals at a high enough level where they did have birth defects, and all of the birth defects was neural tube birth defects, every one of them. And so they had actually showed that aspartame fed to animals caused neural tube birth defects. Well, that's worse than showing that it causes cancer. It should have stopped everything. Did I
mm-hmm.
see that study? No. That scoundrel toxicologist that I met,
Mm-hmm.
he was the one that sequestered some studies, and that was one of the studies. And I didn't see that until 25 years later, even after seeing her. I had no idea that was in the record.
How did you
None at all.
discover that? How did you
Huh?
discover it was in the record?
What's her name? Martini.
Uh-huh. Betty
She was
Martini.
always sending in petitions to the government to get for secrecy. And she would always send them to me if she got anything. And so finally,
Wow.
it was released, the government changed or something, and that was released to me. But in the meantime, I had said, I'm going to test, this, gosh, I knew methanol was the issue. There was no toxicology. I mean, teratology is the study of producing monsters and so birth defects. There's no
Uh-huh.
teratological work done at all in methanol at that time. Nothing was done on methanol. As far as I knew, nothing was done on aspartame, because they don't have to do that for food additives, which is bizarre to me, but they did it anyway, and they found it did cause the same thing that killed that girl. And so when I did the studies, sure enough, we were getting neural tube birth defects. I mean, tons of them, amazing amount, and this is for methyl. But anyway, so so that was one of the things that happened that changed my whole life and got me into looking at that, and got me into, when we did our animals, when we fed our animals, the level of methanol that would cause them to respond as humans, because that's a very tricky thing to do. And I developed that method in my laboratory. We discovered just, this huge amount of neural tube birth defects, but above that, we discovered that some of these animals, like we dissected the animals when they were first born, and we saw all sorts of damage going on to the cerebellum, and these are all birth defects. And then some of the pups, because I had a lot of women working for them. All my students were, all my graduate students were women at that time, and they were all nurturing the pups and taking care of the infants. And I was administering the methyl alcohol to the dams,
Yeah, huh?
and so these kids would be taking care of the pups and stuff, and a lot of the pups were born with neural tube birth defects. We took records of that. We took pictures of that. But the pups that survived, something weird was going on with them, and the girls called them silly pups. And I'm here with them at lunch one time. I'm sitting down because they did the daily care of the animals. And she said, "God, Dr. Monte, these pups are really silly." I said, well, "What's silly about them?" They don't want to. They won't eat unless we coax them. Some of them died because they just didn't catch on to sucking in the teats of the mother. So I figured, well, that's interesting. So when I did a dissection of one of these pups, you could see this changes going on in the cerebellum of the pup. Not enough to be a neural tube birth defect, but just something's going on there, the cerebellum, which would cause this defects in lots of things. And I'm going, well, what the heck is this? I've never ever seen it before. At any rate, so from then on, I started worrying about the possibility that there were more birth defects involved with the consumption of aspartame than just the neural tube birth defects. And that's when I started thinking that, and sure enough, that's exactly the time from the day they added aspartame to Diet Cola. 9 months later, the effective rate of autism started going up. And if you look at the curve, it's still going up. If you look at that curve of consumption, I have that in my book. I mean, that was a whole chapter of mine, which is available, by the way, free of charge, Janet. I'm going to send you a copy of it. You can send it to any of your people who are interested in it. But that chapter is available, and I will, it's available on my website as well, free of charge. Take a look at it. But if you look at just a few months ago, the new rate of autism has been tracked, and it's now 1 in 36. Last year it was 1 in 44. And so the only thing you can associate that with, as far as I'm concerned, is aspartame consumption. You look at that curve, everything else, vaccinations, they're worried about the mercury in vaccinations. Well, guess what? They took the mercury out of vaccinations. Did the curve change? No. They're worried about, what's his name? Kennedy is worried about vaccination numbers and stuff. And there've been books written about that, and people changing the number of vaccinations that infants are getting. Did the numbers change? No. It's still going up, still going up. And the only thing you can associate that with, just directly, is the consumption of this terrible sweetener that contains inordinate amounts of methyl alcohol. And so I'm just saying, that's one thing that that's why I'm still fighting this issue, because I think that's horrifying. It's just horrifying. And neural tube birth defects, ever since, the woman came in and showed me Joy's pictures, I was looking at the rate of neural tube birth defects in the American population, because I thought, well, they're consuming all this aspartame. She's right. That number is going to go up.
Right.
And so I kept on going to that data and going to the Center for Disease Control and getting to know people there, and it didn't look like it was going up. I said, well, damn it. I mean, of course, I'm finding it in the animals now, and it's still not going up in the human population. Then I found out that all of my, test humans, all of the kids that were developing neural tube defects in the womb were being aborted. They were being aborted. And so I called the Center for Disease Control. I said, where can I get this data? He said, well, we don't keep the data. We're not allowed to keep the data. Not allowed by who? I said, well, that's just our rules. I said, why? Well, it's birth defects. If you abort something, it's not birthed, is it? And I said, fuck you, is what I said. Excuse my language. I was so mad. so mad, so very, very, very angry. And so, you know, I would put all that in that chapter, and that's worth reading because it's the truth. And so, you know, how can we let this happen? How did the Food and Drug Administration not release that data? If they would have released it to me before I did my studies, I could have narrowed the studies down much more particularly
Yeah.
and got, you know, more important data. So, I mean, I'm
This would
saying
have been
that,
good science. This would have been good science.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the problem is that these things are being covered up, and, you know, it's hard to do anything. And I've been trying to do things for a long, long time. And
Well, and you know, Woody, this is the problem that we face today tenfold. There's been decades.
mhm,
You've been fighting this for 40 years and nothing has gotten done. We're still getting gaslighted, bad information. It's been advertised that it's perfectly safe. Doctors aren't informed about it. And it's not just the aspartame. There's just so much out there now. But when you have the experience, and I love the story that you have told, when you have the experience that you have had, and you're a good scientist, and you've seen what you've seen in your pups and in the FDA files, and you see that nothing is being done about it, you try
mhm.
to talk about it and you're suppressed. I mean, what's new? This has only gotten worse. And I think it's important for people to understand that this has been going on a long time. It's not just COVID, it's not just the vaccines. The question mark on what's causing autism, they know.
Mhm.
Good
Mhm.
science knows. And they're not listening to people like you, scientists like you, that you see what you see, you know what you know.
Yeah, and the facts are out there, and it's not. It's now everything is sort of available. You know, when we know that autism is a birth defect, it's not what they're trying to say it is. That it,
Exactly.
you can't turn it around because it's defects in the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is what I saw being destroyed right in front of my eyes, and these infant animals, and so, and they saw, you know, and the interesting thing is that a few years back, the Food and Drug Administration, although they didn't say why, they increased the required amount of folic acid that people had to take during pregnancy.
Yeah, I remember when they were doing a campaign with that.
And they didn't say why. They
Uh-huh.
never said why.
Right.
And here I'm looking for neural birth defects going up, but I'm looking at it. I'm on the data every month, see nothing. So they're seeing the same data, except they're seeing they're seeing the actual, you know, the abortions that are going on. So they're seeing an increase. And if you look at a few states, I found some information on the internet of a couple of states that kept record of even the abort, and this sure enough did go up. Went up like a rocket. And the only reason that folic acid is necessary during pregnancy is what? Is to prevent neural tube defects. So the scoundrels, instead of
Right.
stopping aspartame, they thought maybe they could reduce the harm by increasing the folic acid. But the folic acid is only so protective. You know, the formaldehyde is still doing its damage it's horrifying. I mean, but isn't that ridiculous? And so who are the
Yes.
people who were doing this, and why didn't they, release the reason for doing this? And you can't get to anybody. I especially can't. I call the Food and Drug Administration, and all of a sudden the line stops working. They just hang up. And so,
Right.
but I mean, that's sad. It's really sad. But I mean,
Well, after all these years, sort of like me, I mean, I've just kept on keeping on, getting my information out there. Your book, While Science Sleeps, is phenomenal, and your website is still available. And we're here, but our voices, I mean, we just do what we can to get to keep this information out there. But after all of these years, Woody, until the WHO made their announcement, I kind of felt like I was just sort of a ghost in the machine, you know? How did you feel? Now, how do you feel? Because I tell you what, I'm going to keep working and you're going to keep working to get this information back out. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we're going to resurrect all of this. These are
Mhm.
stories that need to be told.
Yeah, and
So,
my book's not very popular. I mean, probably a handful of people have read it, but that chapter on cancer,
mm,
I did the same thing too. As soon as I heard that they had released that information, I thought, well, okay, so I've actually made that chapter again available for free. You just go to researchgate.com. It's a sign where scientists we can place our
yeah.
articles and that sort of thing, and just the cancers of aspartame. Just look it up. The whole chapter comes up. You download it, and I prefer people to do that to get it, so that it is a positive way of getting it without and showing that people are interested in it. So
And I'll
on
share it.
ResearchGate.
I'll share it in the show notes and on my site as well, for
Oh,
sure.
good. Thank you. Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's so much more for us to say, and I'm going to probably wear you out because I'm going to want to have you on more because I
Oh,
want to
sure.
talk
Yeah,
about
I am
I want to talk
available.
about
I'm
MS,
just
MS,
wait, just sitting here.
and
Yeah,
the MS
MS
and
is
the
another
Asperger. Oh,
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
huge. And then I want to talk about COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, we have only just begun.
Perfect.
And I am so excited to get this information back out there. We're still around. There's not a lot of us that have been in the original aspartame fight that are still
Yeah.
here with us. Many have passed on. Jim Turner did. And
Poor Jim.
Dr.
Yeah.
John
Jim was great. Yeah.
Dr. John Olney has. And
Yeah.
at another time, I want to talk about the research with the lesions in the brain that he found caused by the aspartic acid. I
Right.
mean, aspartame is a carcinogen. It is a neurotoxin, and we've known this. You've known this. You've seen the research, and nothing
Yeah.
has been done. Here we are,
Yeah.
2023,
And
50 years later.
exactly. I mean, anything that turns into formaldehyde in these places in the body that are prone to autoimmune response, how can you say they're not cancer causing, or they don't induce autoimmune diseases? And all those diseases, if you look at all of those diseases, including multiple sclerosis, they have gone up, slowly but surely as the consumption of this stuff goes up. I mean, at some point, some of these diseases, not everybody's prone to. And so the most important time to look at the data is when the poison is first introduced into the colony, in our case,
Mm-hmm.
human colony. When you first introduce it, you look at the numbers and look at the changes that happen there, because, if it's a limiting disease, in other words, only certain kind of genotypes are sensitive to it, then you're going to lose those. They're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be viable. They're not going to reproduce, or they're going to get sick and get out of the population. And then, so if you wait 25 years and look at the population, you're not, it's going to be, by then it's too late for a handful, and an important handful, of these problems. And all of these diseases are related to to the brain and to the circulatory system, and and for good reason, and because this is where you'll find the enzymes that convert methanol into formaldehyde. You'll find it in the lining of the circulatory system,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be in the brain. It'll be wherever it's going, and that's so important, and it's completely being ignored. Completely being ignored. So it's a shame, but it won't be a shame if we can get them turned around, or get other people interested in it, and let us retire.
Never. I'm never going to allow it.
No,
Well,
I'm
I
looking
tell you,
forward to it. I want a place in Hawaii on the water, Oh, that's why I am. I'm sorry.
Right. That's right. Well,
Uh,
I don't want to take up any more of your time today, but Woody, I could just sit and listen to you all day. So
it's my pleasure to work with you, Janet. And you've always been there. You've always been on the right side of these issues. We haven't agreed on everything for sure, but that doesn't matter.
right.
We're heading the right direction. So that's the key.
Well, the cool thing is too, is intellectually, you can never stop learning. You can never stop discovering. And when there's someone like you, because when I was writing Sweet Poison in 91, like I said, your name just came up and your research. And then that's when we first met. And
Mhm.
when you have, this is good science. This is the real science. And like you said, whether you agree with it or disagree with it or want to tweak it or understand parts of it,
Mhm.
you're still learning and you're still exchanging and you're still helping people get better. The betterment and the health and wellness of people is what's at the end of this. And that's why we're in this. This
And the
is why
bottom
we
line
do
is
what we do.
there's no reason to use artificial sweeteners for anything. And I wouldn't, there's no reason for it because it does no good.
Correct.
People who consume them are usually fat and they stay fat. They have a little bit of a reprieve. You don't want to consume a lot of sugar too, but I mean,
Right.
there's no comparison. I mean, so anyway, just the,
Gosh.
the good advice is don't eat, don't, there's no artificial sweetener that I consider safe. None of it, because it's not useful to the body. I mean, even sativa, you can fool people, but you can't fool your brain.
Mm-hmm.
You look at all the long-term studies with any of them, and the fact is, you're not going to lose weight substantially that way.
What would you say to a diabetic?
Well, diabetics can have as much sugar really as they want. I mean, it's a matter of you know, controlling your insulin levels. I think they should stay away from those things, but don't take a poison instead.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I mean, to me, I think diabetics. But that's another topic. Let's do that another day. Let me think about that a little.
Well, that would be a good topic to do and to spend some time on too, because it was marketed to diabetics along with marketed to just the general public, but it was the new everything for a diabetic. You could now have ice cream, you could now have cookies and cakes and all of this stuff if you just use this product. So it was sold to them. But yeah, that should be something that we discuss in detail, because a lot of diabetics out there need to know exactly what you said: complex sugars versus simple sugars versus fake sugars. The fake
Right.
sugars are only going to make them worse and create it in many cases, create the diabetes in many cases. So
Oh, sure.
yes, I definitely want to talk about that. I want to talk about MS. I want to talk more about your personal experiences and your history with this, because Woody, this shouldn't be forgotten. This is something that needs to be remembered, needs to be documented, needs to be videoed, which is what we're doing now.
That's
So
great. So yeah, good. So are we still on the air?
we should be.
Okay, I'm just saying because I'm just curious about because some people have asked me to send them when the show goes on or something. Will you send me a little link to?
I will definitely do that. And what I will do also is we're going to be posting this on janethull.com. And then I don't think that this would be acceptable to YouTube, but we'll try it. I mean, you know,
Oh, let's give it a try because YouTube. Yeah, they need to learn that they
yes,
have to be careful in
it,
what they ban because
I know. I
it's
know.
not
This is
fair.
this is a sweetener war that is, well, it's an information war is what it is. It's an
Right.
education war. It's a war on humanity. We can go into that too. but
Yeah.
it'll definitely, and then we'll put it up on Rumble and Spotify. And so when we get this posted, we'll send you the link, and
Great.
we're definitely going to start a series anywhere and everywhere you can, because I want people to be educated. And your story, I knew it, but not, I just wanted to grab a glass of wine and sit down just to listen to everything you had to say.
Well, it's fun.
It's just
it's an
amazing.
interesting, like many people's stories, an interesting story of how you got into surfing and whether you wanted to get into it or not, or what the pressures are. It's just,
And the politics behind it, or, being an academic, I mean, there's politics in academia, of course, but when you get into the federal government politics, when it comes to something like this, that's disturbing, right?
oh yeah, no, it's, yeah, really sad. I mean, no matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, well, even, and now, of course, I mean,
Right. Things are so weird out there right now. And plus, universities don't support their professors anymore, like
I'm glad I
Arizona
was a
supported you.
professor back when I was a professor, because it was a land grant situation. I got my money from the land grant, most of it for doing my research, and that's almost gone now. They're using the money to, to put, pigskin wallpaper on the coaches' offices and stuff, or using it for their overburgeoning of administrators at universities. Now, yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to be a professor, although I am a emeritus professor. That's, I wouldn't want to be there at the faculty meetings, that's for sure.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a whole different world out there. But we're just going to keep on keeping on,
Okay.
and I can't thank you. Now, your book is While Science Sleeps, and it's available on Amazon. And then we're going to have a link on my site to where you can get into ResearchGate to read the chapter on cancer.
And
And
you can go to my website, which has every single research article that I quote or use in the book or anywhere. The actual article itself is on my website. You just click the thing in the actual article, you can read the whole article. So that's really important, because a busy faculty member, and instead of going to the library or even looking it up on Google, I mean, the articles are all there. And the
that's
chapters
very
that I
important.
and the chapters that I send out have all the references on them. The book was too big and was getting too expensive because it's a color printing thing.
Right.
And so I didn't, the references are not there. They're listed and referenced, but all the bibliography is on the website, whilesciencesleeps.com.
Well, and I think it's really important to print those off too, because I don't trust the internet. I don't trust the FDA. I don't trust anybody to keep this. So print it off and have a copy of it, because that's how so much of what I did when I was researching sweet poison, to put the proof in there. I just had it all, printed off.
Yeah.
Well, of course,
exactly.
I wrote the book before we had access to the computer and to,
Sure.
all of the fancy stuff. But all righty, Dr. Woody Monte, who is enjoying Hawaii. And thank you so much for coming on with me today. And we will definitely continue this, because this is Aspartame 101 with Dr. Mon and Dr. Hull. We're going to teach you about aspartame.
Teach you how to get in trouble. A friend just sent CNN Health has got an article too, aspartame cancer and other health risks you need to know. And I'll send it to you. I'll email it to you. The friend just.
Awesome. Well, and I tell you, this has only begun for you and me, because I smell a rat. We were talking the other day. Why would the WHO do this? Why would they do this? What is going to replace aspartame? What is the Coca-Cola company going to do? They're going to have something else sitting in the sidelines to keep their money and their profits coming in.
I know what they're going to do.
What?
Nothing. Because they're just listing it as a possible
Possible.
carcinogen. I mean, it would be
Uh-huh.
good if they changed it to something else, but everything else is much more expensive now.
Uh-huh.
So it's just the money thing. So I would say that, even the dairy industry tried to successfully got the Department of Agriculture to make aspartame part of the standard of identity for, low calorie yogurts. So you don't even have to list it now in low calorie yogurts as an ingredient.
Right.
So
And
that's dangerous, because I found when we did our survey to see if aspartame consumption was associated with pregnant mothers was associated with autism, we
Mhm.
found it definitely was, and most of these women were consuming light yogurts as their source of aspartame, and that was the horrible part of it. So now, if they don't have to list it on the label, it's even worse. So I think, what has to happen really is just a ban of this stuff. But
yeah.
too many companies are going to be against that. And right now, the United States is, of course, run by companies. So
Exactly. So, well, nothing's changed as far as them trying to burn down houses and get us fired from our professorships and all of that. That was going on back with us 30, 40 years ago, and nothing's
I tell
changed
you,
today, has it? All righty.
it's funny. It's been fun. All right.
Woody, thank you so much for joining
Hey,
me
call
today.
anytime. I'm here.
We will do this again because there's so much more to share. Thank
Okay.
you for your wonderful, wonderful stories
Oh,
today.
thanks for letting me talk. It was wonderful. I haven't talked in public in a long time. It's a
All
real
righty.
treat.
Well, welcome
Thank you so much.
to Holistic Network. We're going to continue doing this. So thank you, Woody.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
We'll
Janet.
talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.